Good morning, everyone. It's great to not necessarily see everyone, but it's great to be together with everyone. We had a great time Wednesday night for all those that were able to join us to spend time with Gilbert from Lagos, Nigeria, to be able to hear him share about how things are going there and just the encouragement as our special mission comes up.
Really see everyone, but
Doug and Angela send their greetings this morning. They are off helping and driving to Phoenix right now. They're helping move their daughter and son-in-law to Phoenix. And so it's just great to see everyone, and we're glad that you're here.
Good morning, everybody. So glad that we're all together for this parenting workshop. We're so excited to have the Baton Rouge Church, the New Orleans Church joining us today. This is so cool that we get to have so many different resources together to learn about how to be a great parent and to take care of our children. One thing about family is that it can look different. It can look different from situation to situation. Some of you might be on here as grandparents wanting to help raise your grandchildren. Some of you are adoptive parents, fostering children. Some of you just want to know, how can I be a better support to those that are raising their children? We are just so glad that you're here. And if this is your first time joining us for an event with the Greater Houston Church, we're so happy that you took the time this Saturday morning to join us. Thank you.
And it's great having Derik and Leigh Ann and their family joining us today. We're so grateful they took up the time to spend with us here. They have 3 children, Haley, Josh, and Emma. And Emma's there in the back. And we all know Josh preached here about a year ago with Hope Youth Corps at our congregational service. So many of us know Josh. They were missionary in Russia for years. They've been in Dallas, Fort Worth area for years now. And personally, we just really respect them a lot and appreciate their friendship a lot. So we're so excited that the rest of the church here gets to hear from them and just be able to soak up some of the nuggets they have just about family and raising kids. So kind of the order of what we're going to do today is they're going to go and present their lesson here. So we'll watch that. And then at the end of the lesson, they're going to come on and they're going to take questions. So we can ask questions and they'll take time to answer them for a while. I think their lesson's around 30 minutes, and then we'll have some question and answer for about 15 minutes or so. Then we'll take a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back and we'll hear another lesson for, again, about another 30 minutes. And then we'll have questions and answer time for about another 20 minutes. And we'll close out with some announcements and things like that. So again, we're excited that you're all here. We're excited for Derik and Leigh Ann to be here to share. So I don't know if you want to kind of intro your lesson here, and then we'll go into it.
Yeah, so this first lesson is just really kind of looking at the younger years, and our kids will be participating in that as well. And we just look forward to any questions that you have after that video. And then the second lesson is really about the later years. And so we're just excited to be with our brothers and sisters in Greater Houston Church.
Yes.
Greater Houston Church. We are
the Vett Family.
I'm Derik.
I'm Leigh Ann.
I'm Josh.
And I'm Emma.
And we're excited to share our family with you this weekend.
We're going to be sharing from the parents' perspective.
And we'll be sharing from the kids' perspective.
So thanks for having us. Let's get started.
Brothers and sisters, we're so honored to be able to share with you this morning in this parenting workshop. But by no means are we perfect parents. But we have learned a lot. We have a lot of experiences. But before we share them with you, we thought it'd be good to share a little bit about ourselves.
So we have been married for 29 years. We got married in St. Petersburg, Russia, while serving as missionaries overseas. And then our first daughter, Haley, was born in Stockholm, Sweden, while we led the church there for a couple of years. And now she's 25, and she's married to the awesome David Louie.
And then our son, Joshua, turned 22, and he just graduated from UTSA and is now taking a full-time ministry position with the Austin Christian Church.
And then our youngest is Emma. She's 16 years old, a junior in high school, and they're all faithful disciples, and we are so grateful to God for the blessings that they bring to our lives.
Yeah, and we especially want to just express our gratitude to you, the church there in Houston, as last summer, my son Josh and Emma got to be part of your first youth corps. And man, they came back with such incredible memories. They really felt your love and support. And so thank you for the influence you've had even in our children's lives. We have often heard the charge to have biblical parenting, but what does that actually mean? The Bible primarily focuses on individuals within communities and being the people of God. However, within those community of God's people, we find direction for the families they contain. There are many passages that record the commands to fathers and mothers on what to do with their children, as well as many examples of parents, good and bad, that we can learn from as parents of our own children. So what is biblical parenting? I believe it is simply doing the best we can as parents, using and exemplifying biblical principles in the raising of our children. In Proverbs 22:6, CSB translation, it says, "Start a youth out on his way. Even when he grows old, he will not depart from it." ESV, "Train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it." And the CEV, "Teach your children right from wrong. And when they are grown, they will still do right." One thing we need to understand about Proverbs is that they represent general truths and principles. However, they are not promises that they will always be true. Without that understanding, this passage can be a very heavy burden for many of us as parents. It was never intended to do that. Even in context of the passage, it's broken into two sections. One, prescribing the actions of the parents, and the other, describing the eventual response of the adult children. See, as parents, we are only responsible for the first part. The second is entirely up to the child as they continue to mature. We should not try to do something God doesn't even do. Take away free will. Biblical parenting is about incorporating principles that can bring blessings to your family, but they are not guarantees, as each individual has a choice. As parents, we're trying to equip our children with the best foundation possible so that they eventually can make right choices.
I know some of you moms might be just starting out on this journey of motherhood, while others of you have been doing this for a long time. Either way, I want to start by sharing a few things with you first. First of all, we know that these days are long in the early years and the years are short. We also know it's very physically draining those first few years, but then later it gets more emotionally draining. So either way, we're in this for the long haul. But 3 quick things I want to share with you moms first that we've got to teach and train ourselves is 1, to give yourself grace, a lot of grace. You know, there are times that we're going to feel like we have to be super mom, that we have to get everything done, that every dish in the sink has to be clean, and every piece of clothing has to be clean, but you just got to be the best version of you. You're not going to get everything done. The to-do list will continue, but be present in the moment and give yourself grace. Don't compare yourself to other moms and what they can do and what they're getting accomplished, especially if it's on social media, because we know that those pictures of the perfect moms with all 5 of their kids under the age of 3 with every hair in place isn't realistic. We just got to do the best we can. The second thing, take time to adapt. It just takes time. Every new stage in life takes time. And one of the areas that's going to take time to adapt is your walk with God. I remember becoming a new mom thinking, I can't have my hour quiet times anymore. I can't have a time that's uninterrupted. They find me in the closet. They find me in the garage. They find me in every room of the house. But it takes time to adapt in any new situation. We've got to be creative with podcasts that we can listen to while we clean. The prayers. I prayed so many prayers while I was feeding my baby in the middle hours of the night, listening to Christian music in the car, and even Christian cartoons or spiritual cartoons. It's amazing what you can learn in a great cartoon or a Bible story that you're reading to your children. It takes time to adapt to new routines. So again, give yourself that grace and give yourself time to adapt. The third thing is to stop. We have to give ourselves permission to stop. There's times that you're going to need to stop and take a time out yourself. There's going to be times that you're going to need to stop and take a little 15-minute nap if you can, and put everybody in their beds and in their rooms and say, you know what, mommy needs a timeout. Mommy needs a nap. Find your place. Find those moments of peace. Find help. Sometimes it's just a matter of us asking for help. But I think doing those three things, giving yourself a lot of grace, taking the time that we need to adapt to each and every situation, whether it's a newborn or a toddler or a teenager or a middle schooler, we're going to need to take time to adapt. And also just taking that time to give yourself permission to stop and give yourself a timeout. These three things have been helpful for me in adapting to motherhood in each stage of life.
I'm so proud of my wife because I got to witness that, and I agree with everything she just said. I also want to really encourage our single parents. You're already in a very difficult situation. I can't even imagine trying to raise kids by myself. I need my wife, I need the church, and I want you to know you're not alone, that you have the church family to help you. Now, we have framed these two lessons from the proverb we began with, but I also want to share where Jesus, in one of his parables, really shows us how to parent. In Luke 15, verse 11, CSB translation, it says, "He also said, a man had 2 sons. Now, often the focus is only on the one son, but the father had 2 sons. The key to parenting is being consistent, no matter how different the children might be or respond. Of course, the rest of the parable is really about the second part of the proverb, how the older children would respond and learn from their own choices. However, it is implied that there was a lot of parenting that had taken place before this point. His parenting didn't begin when one decided to leave and one decided to stay, as we will see in more detail in the next lesson. It can be assumed that Jesus was referring to the context of his audience, the Jewish people, and all the customs and backgrounds in that context. The father would have known all the commands about parenting that were in Deuteronomy and Proverbs, as well as the many examples, good and bad, of the patriarchs, judges, kings, and prophets that are recorded in the scriptures. This father would have started his youths on their way. He would have trained his children in the way they should go. He would have taught his children right from wrong. Therefore, in this first lesson, we really want to focus on parenting young children. Some of the first parenting direction given by God to his people is found in this passage referring to Abraham. In Genesis 18:19, it says, "For I have chosen him," Abraham, "so that he will command his children and his house after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is right and just. This is how the Lord will fulfill to Abraham what he promised him." What was the commands of God to Abraham? And to command means authority is necessary, it's required. His commands were to keep the way of the Lord and to do what is right and just. So our first point in today's lesson is keep the way of the Lord. You know, this is not an easy one for me early on in being a parent. Coming from my background where I grew up with a terminally ill father who couldn't really be engaged in the same way. I saw my mom do most of the parenting. And so I really defaulted to Leigh Ann when it came to raising our children. And I saw the frustration. Many of you know the Incredibles movie where the mom is saying, "Engage!" I really had to learn to do that. I had to understand, like Abraham, I'm the one called as the man, as the father, to command them in the ways of the Lord. If we're going to start them on the way and to keep the way of the Lord, then one thing we need to do is establish rhythms. See, the Lord built rhythms into creation: days, weeks, years, and seasons. And if we want to be in sync with the life God intended for us individually, as a married couple, and as a family, then we too need to learn to live a life of rhythms: daily, weekly, seasonal, and special. You know, one of these charts I'm going to show you really helps break down not only the rhythms, but as well the relationships within those rhythms. When we look at daily, you have your relationship with God. That can be shown in your quiet times, your times in deep personal Bible study and prayer. In your marriage, it's the couch time, the time where you connect with your spouse. With family, it's those daily dinners, those times where you can connect each day. With children, those individual connections, whether it's as you're driving them to school or prayers in bed at night before they go to sleep. In the weekly, God, that would be the Sabbath, the time where we take a break to really focus on Him and and be grateful for all that he's given us. In marriage, it's that weekly date, which is very, very important. With the family, that could be your family night or your night that you have the devotional that week. And with your children, the special times that you find during that week, whether it's a date, whether it's a walk on the street to talk and pray, but to have that weekly time. Then there's the seasonal. With God, sometimes we need retreats, whether it's a parenting workshop, whether it's a marriage retreat, or even just you with God. And with marriage, we need those getaways, those times to reconnect, because a family is only as strong as the husband and wife's relationship. And then, of course, with family, the traditions, those seasonal traditions of vacations and holidays that are really memorable and often are some of the greatest memories our children will have. And then, of course, those seasonal one-on-ones, those little getaways with your individual kids, doing something they really love doing and connecting with them and meeting them where they are. And then, of course, the special. Now, with God, that may mean you need an extended time away with God, just you and him. With marriage, it means those celebratory getaways, anniversaries. I know for me, one of our favorite was just a few years ago on our 25th when we finally got to go to Maui. Never will forget it, and I'm looking forward to returning someday. And with family, it's those vacations. I really love how much work and effort and just joy my wife has in making these really memorable vacations that I'm so grateful for. And then, of course, for our children, sometimes we need those one-on-one trips. One of my favorite one-on-one trips was being able to go to my favorite team in the NFL with my son and see a football game at their stadium.
I think in thinking about the family rhythms, whether we're sitting at the dinner table, whether it's the rhythm of putting your kids to bed at night and having a Bible story and a prayer or just talking to them, in these rhythms, one of the things that was so helpful for us, and we still do it to this day, is to emphasize the power of God. In everything that we do, whether you just want them to see God in everything, whether you're going on a walk and you're looking at creation and look how God made that tree and look how God made that animal. You know, God created that. Isn't God amazing? God gave you to me. Look how God created your hands and your fingers and your toes. Look how God made you so smart and so intelligent and so beautiful. God made you. God is awesome. God provided this food for us tonight. You know, look how God is so colorful in his food choices, and everything tastes so differently. God encouraged your heart today by giving you that special treat from your teacher. God did this, God did that. Showing God in everything that you do. We need this as adults too, right? It just helps us to stay focused on God. I think about Jesse as a dad in 1 Samuel 17, and when he sent out David. You know, here they were looking for a king, and they looked at all of his sons, and there David was in the field, you know, with the sheep. He was out there in the pasture, and they come and they find David, and they send David to the front line to fight Goliath. Well, just to check on his brothers, but they send him to the front lines, and he ends up fighting Goliath and saving Israel. And what was it that came out of David's mouth and that came out of David's heart? It was the Lord rescues. I come in the name of the Lord. The Lord will deliver. The world will know that there is a God in Israel. The Lord saves. The battle is the Lord's. And this all comes from a young boy who was 17. He was in his teens. And look how he saw God everywhere. He saw the power of God. And I know in our homes, the more and more that we can talk about the power of God. Derik and I share our Russia stories when we were missionaries overseas. Every time we have a guest speaker come into town, we want our kids to come along and join in on the conversations to hear about what God has done all over the world. You know, we always try to sneak our kids in, you know, even if we have to bring a brown paper bag lunch or something, we want them to hear, we want them to have heroes in the faith that talk about how great God is. We want them to hear people's testimonies. When they come to dinner and we sit around the table, tell us how you became a Christian. Tell us how great God is and how God moved in your life. When we can do that for our children and we're talking about it all the time, it gives them the best opportunity to seek after God themselves. We know that our children ride on our coattails of faith for quite a while. And then there comes a point in time in their teen years, usually, and maybe later, that they will come face to face on their own and figure out, is this my faith or is it my parents'? The second thing is to train the heart, not just the actions. When we go through our daily, weekly routines with our children, whether we're at the dinner table, we're in the car, it's bedtime, we're trying to get out the door to head to school or to head to church, there's so many opportunities that we will have as parents to train the heart. It will be for us as a parent to train our own hearts, but it will also be for us to train theirs. And I know it's easy just to expect them to obey. Just obey because I told you to obey. Or don't hit your brother. There's a lot of don'ts and a lot of no's that come out of our mouth. But to truly train in a way that gets to the heart. Our goal cannot be for our children to just not sin. Our goal has to be to equip them to honor God in all that they do, even from an infant stage. It's a training that takes place, and it has to be intentional. And this is where the family devotionals and the consistency of talking about God and talking about His Word and talking about the right way to do things. We focus a lot on the wrong way to do things, but we've got to teach them the right way to do things. We had many of nights where we would have our family devotionals. Okay, we're going to teach here's the wrong way and here's the right way, and what way is pleasing to God. And I think it's going to be so important for us in this stage of life and those early years to teach and train what is right and what is good and what's honorable. And I think understanding Proverbs 22:15, that folly is bound up in the heart of a child, but the rod of discipline will drive it away. And understanding our children need a lot of training. You may think, I taught our kids this, 3 weeks ago. I don't understand. We had it down pat. It's going to be training over and over and over in these earlier years. But again, keeping in mind, it's going to be training over and over for us too, to stick at it, stick with it, because it's worth it in the end.
When I think and look back on my earlier years and my upbringing, what helped me the most was just overall family time and those bonding memories. And there was just a constant encouragement going on in the household. And one thing that helped with that was this thing we called the encouragement bowl. And every night at the dinner table, all of our names would be in the bowl, and we would have to choose a random slip of paper with one of our family members' names on it and just talk about something we love about them and just encourage them. And it just gave me a deep foundation of finding the good in people. Another thing that really helped was family devotionals, and some were more memorable than others. And as a young kid, I wouldn't be super excited each time, but it was just such a great way to connect God and my family. And just that consistency really built a strong foundation in my life. And I'm just very grateful looking back that we had those every Monday, and it was just very helpful. Along with family time, one-on-one time is so important. And I know my dad would take each of us kids individually on donut dates, and I would always look forward to that because it was just me and dad time. And also, I really appreciate my one-on-one time with my mom. And every day after school, she would stop and put away her phone just to listen to how my day went. Whether it was a bad day or a good day, she would listen to my hour-by-hour explanation of what happened. And I just really appreciate that.
So to start our children on the way, we got to keep the way of the Lord. But that starts with us. And then as Leigh Ann already alluded to, we got to teach them, point two, to do what is right and just. And I believe there's a reason he adds just. It's not just about what to do, but it's the how and why we do it as well. See, later, God would communicate direction not just to the one family, but the entire people of Israel, as is clear in the Shema of Deuteronomy. This direction was given in context of the whole community. Parenting was not meant by God's people to be done alone. It required impression, repetition, and training. However, it was not only incorporated in the moment of discipline of a child. See, too often that is where parenting is only focused, when parenting should be predominantly incorporated in the more productive and positive times outside of the moments of discipline. None of us learn well when we're being criticized or given correction. See, in raising children, there are some important principles to understand based on the ages of your children. As you can see from this chart, when they're young, you really lead through authority. You're bigger, you're stronger. They're going to listen to what you say. But as they get older, especially when you get to those middle school years, you actually lose authority. You still are the parent of the household, You still do get to tell them and protect them and train them. But now you're going to need to shift to influence. That's the only thing we'll have as they get older. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the next lesson. But influence is going to require communication. It's going to require being an example. See, in teaching them to do what is right, it does not mean you're always right. I made a lot of mistakes, but I can still teach them what is right by repenting. I've had to come to my children, collectively and individually, and ask for forgiveness for me being short-tempered, for being irritated or reacting because I felt inconvenienced, or not really listening. I needed to come to them and show them that what's right isn't me. It's what God expects from me and from Leigh Ann and from us as a family in order to please God. We want to do what is right and just.
One thing I just wanted to add to that as well is just how important it is as parents that we get advice from other godly parents. And it's important for our kids as they become of age to see that, wow, my mom and dad are getting help. My mom and dad are growing. My mom and dad are getting advice. My mom and dad are getting discipling. We would share that with our kids. You know, we'd sit at our family devotionals or in our times around the family table, and we would share what we learned, or if we got discipling on something, how we're growing and how this was great and how this was good, because we always need to grow and change. And even when it involves our children, there were times we would tell our children, you know, we're going to go get advice about whether or not you should attend that dance, or, you know, just go get some other thoughts on this. And we would send them as they got older to go get advice themselves, because we wanted to teach that we want to honor God. And sometimes we may not have all the answers ourselves. You know, we'll pray about it, but we also want to involve other families to help give us great insight and direction. And I remember one time when our son was a preteen and really wanted to play a video game that I felt like was inappropriate in terms of, you know, just the guns and all those things in this video game. And I remember asking many moms and telling him, you know what, because there was starting to become a little Grand Canyon divide between us. And a couple of the moms were like, they had boys as well, said, you know what, if this is the battle you want to choose, then that's your choice. You know, but at the end of the day, it is not, you know, you've got to adapt here with your son and just continue keeping the conversations open. And I remember coming home after praying about it and saying, okay, you know what, I think we're gonna let up and let you play this game. But we got input. You know, of course, he was very grateful for that input that we got. But I just remember things like that. That meant a lot to him, that, wow, my mom would say no, but then she would go get input and seek godly input and pray about it and come back with a different response. And I think it's just important for our families and for our children to have other families involved and other people involved, so it's not just us that carry the weight and the decision making.
You know, and as we try to keep them in the way of the Lord and we try to teach them to do what is right and just, don't forget we're going to have to do what is right and just as well. And it's not always easy. I remember with some of the gaming as he got older, it became very self-focused and took a lot of his time. But the problem is I also like gaming, and it was taking a lot of my time and has even affected our marriage at times. And I remember my son coming to me and saying, well, Dad, you have a game. You just got the upgrade. And I realized if I'm going to teach him what is right, I got to exemplify it first. And so I said, son, come with me. Here's the upgrade. I don't want this to ever be a stumbling block to you. So we're going to go to the game place and we're going to give it back. And I remember he couldn't believe that. And later he told me he was just hoping I wouldn't call his bluff. But he'll never forget that, hey, if I'm going to call him to do it, my dad is going to do it too. And that was very tough for me. I never went back and played that game ever again. But I sure gained an incredible relationship with my son, and not to mention a lot of blessings in our marriage.
You know, looking back at the early years, there was a lot of things that started me out on my way. There wasn't one specific beacon of light in my life where everything came realized and this is who I need to be, this is how I'm supposed to act. It was a lifetime of Veggie Tales and going to youth camps and Kids Kingdom on Sundays and family devotionals. There were so many things that started me out on my way and continue to teach me to this day. But I have to say, the most important moments for me growing up were the conversations that I got to have with my parents. when I would mess up or I would be corrected or disciplined, my parents didn't just punish me for my actions. They wanted to know my heart. And so they would come and they would meet me where I'm at. And, hey, kiddo, why'd you do that? What's going on? And they really guided me through why I was acting out the way I was. And through that, it allowed me to discover my sinful nature through those conversations and realize, man, okay, I'm not perfect. And I think the thing that helped me the most is when I got to have a conversation with my own dad, and my dad just being vulnerable enough to tell me, his son, that he's not perfect either. And I think seeing that, it helped me realize that right and wrong comes from God more than just my parents. My parents don't discern this is right, this is wrong. My parents as well were on this journey of trying to follow God's view of what's right and wrong. And I think it's those conversations that changed my life and shaped me into who I am today.
So I hope today in this first lesson, you really appreciate the direction God has given us. Whether you've been doing this for a little while, whether you've just started, or maybe you're already at the point where the kids are the next stage. Well, we'll address that in the next lesson. But let us understand, it is our role to start them on their way, to help them keep the way of the Lord, and to teach them to do what is right and just. I hope that lesson helped you guys. There are a few questions that have already been put on the chat line. I want to encourage you to continue to do that. Then we'll have a little bit break later. But one of the questions that was asked is, how much input do we get in deciding some of those rhythms, the daily, the weekly, the seasonal, and the special? And so any of you would like to jump in on that? Obviously, as I showed in that chart there near the end of the lesson, it's about the age. As they're younger, it's authority. So obviously we're directing that. If they say, I don't want to have the dinner time. No, you're going to have dinner time with this family. But as they get older, then you do start to let them interact in that, because this is a family thing, not just what dad wants or what mom wants. It's what do we want as a family? And one of the areas we really saw that influence shift from authority was with our just family devotionals. We decided that on our weekly family devotionals, each week a different member of the family would lead it. Even Emma, who was really young at the time, she would choose the meal we're going to have. She would choose the fun thing we're going to do, and she would lead the little Bible study, obviously with a little help. But it was really cool seeing each week, each one of our family members leading that time.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add too, I think there was just core things that we said we're not budging. Family dinners, that was one of them. And it was not, hey, I want to go have dinner in my room. I want to go, I've got soccer practice or whatever. Then we would shift our dinner and we would have it later that night, or we would try to have it earlier. And obviously, as your kids get older, some might have to go to work or have to stay after for football practice. And those things are going to happen, of course, but that was the exception and not the rule. And that was just our time. We put our phones away. We would come together. I think on the daily routines with God, we definitely were not one to push our kids to read the Bible every day, but we made it a part of our life every day, where it was like, hey, this is something I was learning today, and I read, and they would see us reading our Bibles in the morning. So it was more of, we wanted to encourage them with our examples, but those were things that we didn't push. We did not want our kids to feel pushed to seek after God, but to be inspired to seek after God.
Anything you guys want to add about the rhythms?
Yeah, I mean, my mom kind of said it, but it's not budging on the family kind of traditions and weekly schedule that you guys set, because things will happen. As a kid, I'd be like, Mom, I want to go over to blah, blah, blah's house on Friday. And it's like, hey, no, we have family time. And so I think the more leeway that I had to go over to a friend's house, that family schedule kind of diminishes. But when that family schedule is strong, like, no, we're going to have this every week. If you get pushback in the beginning, it'll quickly diminish, because it's like, well, this is how we do it. And as your kids grow up and go to college, you'll start to look back and go, oh, and feel very nostalgic for the family times and how much it really did for you. So it's worth it.
Yeah. Actually, there's a great question that kind of alludes to that as well, as, when kids seem opposed to attending church or wanting to be involved, how hard do we push? That is a very tough question. The way I would go about it is I don't talk about pushing them to join or participate in church. What I try to more say is church is our family. It's not something separate we do. So when you choose not to participate, you're choosing not to participate as a family. And as long as you're under our household, this is what we do as a family. And they may not engage on the same level that someone else might of one of their siblings, but we're going to do this as a family. Now, obviously, as they get older, I would recommend getting a lot more input. We'll be talking a lot more about how do we get other influences in our kids' lives when they get to that age. That's a hard thing for us as parents to let go and trust that God can work in our children's lives even besides us. So we'll allude to that more in the next lesson. Is there anything you want to share about that?
Yeah, and I think just encourage you guys, that is a tough thing. And I know we have witnessed that a lot, where even if their kids come to church, they'll sit on the back row. They don't want to talk to anybody. It's obvious that they were forced to come. That happens at camp. It happens at teen events. It happens a lot. So you're not alone in that struggle. I do think, though, it's important to just remember, like Derik said, that this is our family too, our extended family, the churches, and be creative at trying to bring the church then into your home as well. And just trying to make them see that this is a fluid thing, that it's not just something we do on Sundays, but this is our life, and make those fun. And that's where if you have people over in your home for dinners and things like that, you can encourage people to connect with your kids on a different level. So they will feel like, oh, when I go to church, I'm going to see, Mr. Bob, and, I'm going to see my aunts and uncles that are from my extended family, that will make them feel like, okay, this isn't just going to, get God pushed down my throat, but this is going to see extended family.
Mm-hmm. This is a great question. It's actually for you, Josh and Emma. Is when did you start to feel like your faith was your own and not about your parents? What helped you make that transition?
I think, honestly, I'll share about it in the next lesson, just about my personal life and my walk with God. But I think when I started realizing and taking ownership of my sin, I realized, wow, this needs to be my decision, and I need to go after God on my own and find God on my own. And so I think just really taking ownership and watching my parents just lead the family in such an amazing spiritual way really helped me realize I want to be like that, and not just relying on their own, but having and building my own faith. And obviously I had a lot of mentors and peers to help me through that process, and really just finding God and stuff like that. But their example really inspired me. And so when I started studying the Bible, I think that's when I started really wanting to build my own faith and really fall in love with God, just as me, Emma. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the kid has to, for me too, we have to have our own solo experience with God. By nature, growing up in the church, it is this is a thing my parents do and I tag along. By nature, you're just in the car rides to church and back. You're waiting in the auditorium for your parents to stop fellowshipping so you can go home. Like, church is in its, early nature, like, oh, this is just what my family does. But when you go on a Hope Youth Corps, or you go to teen camp, or you go, to anything, you go serve for a weekend with the teens or something, when you have that solo experience away from your parents, as much as I think it's awesome for parents to be involved, it's actually super important for the parents to pull back and let their kid trust that God will work with their kid on a youth corps. And that is when, for me, when I saw teenagers preaching and I saw teenagers serving and teenagers sharing their testimony, I was like, oh my gosh, and then it became my ministry and my church. I was like, I am proud to be here. And now I'm getting rides to church with my friends instead of my parents, because I love the ministry so much. And so I think it all starts from having that solo experience where your teen gets to do something by themselves and experience it for themselves.
Yeah. And we will talk about this a little bit more in the next lesson, but I do know for me personally, I was 16 when I became a disciple. And I remember growing up and watching my mom and dad have great faith. But the thing that moved my heart the most was when my dad made a decision to move our family when I was 16 to Boston. because he wanted more training. He wanted to be a part of a discipling church that was really going after helping people in their families, their walks with God, and that was going to take it to the ends of the earth. And so my dad said, that's it. I quit my job. I'm going to go and I'm going to train for the ministry without having a job laid out for him. And so I thought my dad was crazy to move our family, to totally uproot our lives. I had a boyfriend. I was a junior in high school, and I thought that is ridiculous. And I kind of had a little rebellious spell there for a while. And finally, my dad came in one day and said, Leigh Ann, if you can't trust God in this decision, then trust me as I trust God. And that was a very defining moment for me, because I couldn't trust God. It was my parents' faith, and my parents' faith was messing up my life and all this. But somehow I knew that my dad had our best interest in mind. And if I could trust my dad and ride on his coattails for a while, that I would find my identity with God at some point. And sure enough, when we moved our family to Boston and I saw the teen ministry and I saw, just my sin, and I was faced with just being uprooted from everything I loved and was secure in, I had to find God. And I think therefore the years following, when we went to Russia and we went to different places, it became my thing, as I saw and watched my dad step out on faith and trust God, that it then helped me to realize, wow, that's difficult, but faith is inspiring. And you as parents, if you step out on faith in whatever area, it'll show that example. So when your kids then have to make those decisions to trust God, they can trust you as you trust God, but they can also then learn what that looks like as an example to them to step out in faith and trust God when that time comes for them.
And I know that our present situation with the pandemic is probably exposing a lot with our family dynamic, our family atmosphere. Some have probably really enjoyed it. They love being together. Others are driving each other crazy. And that's reality. There's a lot of good questions here, and a lot of them, subconsciously are asking for, what is the perfect plan? What is the manual? There is no manual. We can share principles. We can share experiences. We can even share our mistakes that you can learn from, and the mistakes of others. The Bible is the best manual on how to have relationships, yet even it itself records a lot of dysfunctional families. I think rather than trying to be so functional, we're just trying to be faithful families. We're going to have dysfunction. But if we can practice some of the things that Jesus and God are portraying and telling us in the scriptures, we can learn some lessons that will help our families to become more functional. But our goal is to be faithful. There's a lot of these questions we'll save to the second lesson, because I think a lot of them will be answered about older kids. But there was a question about technology. How much should we allow them? I'll let the kids actually share a little first on that.
Woo. Yeah, okay. Growing up, I had a kitchen timer, the one that you wind and it goes all the way around in a circle. And my mom would set it for 30 minutes. And that's all I had to play video games, was that 30 minutes. And it became so Mom, you set it to 29. You didn't set it to 30. I need that extra minute. But it was good. I think as the younger your kid is, that was super helpful. It allows me to appreciate that time, but not be obsessed or addicted with that thing. Yeah. But as I grew older, I turned that video game that I was trying to play into a YouTube channel that grew to 100,000 subscribers. And so I needed to spend more time on it because it kind of became a job. But as I got older, I think you can slowly, it's you guys made the decision, but you can slowly release those restrictions a little bit as you mature, because over time you'll realize, hey, I got to get going. I have some important things to do. But I do think keeping a timer is actually pretty smart. It helped me. So.
Yeah, it helped me growing up too. And then as I got older, the same thing, those boundaries, I guess, kind of diminished as they trusted us to kind of plan our time wisely, which I think is a very good lesson to learn, because when I would come home from school and play video games, I'm a gamer, but play video games, and I would realize, oh man, I just wasted so much time. Now I have a bunch of homework to do. And so I think it teaches a lot on how to manage our own time wisely. So that's more for as you get older, I guess, but definitely a timer when we were younger helped kind of set those boundaries and those deep roots of setting and making sure we use our time wisely.
I mean, the reality is there's no way to avoid the use of technology, especially right now where everything is through technology. I think the key is making other times. This kind of gets back to the rhythm thing of where you just don't have technology. At the dinner table, we do not have our cell phones. We do not watch TV. This is where we're going to talk to each other. Our daughter alluded to our encouragement bowl, that this is a time that we're going to communicate with one another and have that social interaction. People are more important than pixels. That's kind of the principle that we're trying to uphold. So anything you want to say about that?
Yeah, and I just think too, and Emma's going to, we keep saying about the next class, but Emma's going to share a little bit about her testimony and what happened with her when she was 12 and 13. But but she has a strong conviction, and both of these guys did, about not keeping their technology in their room at night. And that was something that we instilled in them in the beginning. But it was awesome to kind of see what God did through that, and how they had to learn their own lessons about why it's not healthy and good for them spiritually to have their phones in their room. So we keep computers out in the kitchen. Obviously Josh is in college. We don't dictate that stuff for him anymore, or not in college anymore. He's a graduated. He's a single now. But for when they're in the home, we definitely kept technology in the kitchen, out in the open, no phones in the room at night, all those kind of things. Those are just some great foundations. But even with that in place, our kids are going to mess up. And so that's what we'll be sharing a little bit about here in the next one, but how God can still work.
And not forget our own example. We too can actually be on the cell phone a lot. We may not be as much on the other things that our youth are, but it's still the same thing. How much time are we spending on technology rather than engaging with each other, our spouses and our children? Another great question was, when you have younger kids, what are some quick tips of how to maintain patience and controlling anger, keeping that gentle spirit? You want to share anything about that? I know for me, it's a lot about being a team. And again, I really want to just encourage our single parents. You have an incredibly hard challenge when you don't have that teammate. But that's where I really do believe the village becomes so important. And we are so blessed in the church that we don't have to do this alone. But I think a lot of it is knowing your own nature. It's having a sober estimate. With each one of our kids, we have a different dynamic. Sometimes between my wife and Emma, it got hard. And so that's where then I could come in, because I may have a different dynamic with her and be able to lower that tension. But even Leigh Ann would give herself a timeout. Sometimes you have to give yourself a timeout, and you just tell your kid, it's like, I'm about to say or do something I'm going to regret. I don't like what is happening here, but I need a moment. And I think that trains our kids that, hey, even us as adults need to sometimes stop and to compose ourselves. But a lot of this is even grounded in, someone had mentioned earlier, what are some good books? The 5 love languages for your children. A lot of it is learning, how does your child communicate? What is their love language? And are you meeting their need? Too often we only think about my love language. I want my love language fulfilled. But true love is about considering theirs above yourself. And so I think that can help answer some of that. Another question was, how do you know when it's time to study the Bible with your children if they're desiring to become disciples? You mentioned a little bit earlier.
Yeah, So, my parents never actually asked me or pushed me to study the Bible. It was other mentors in my life. And so I know some of my friends growing up in the church felt a little like pressured when their parents were like, do you want to study the Bible? Do you want to study the Bible? And they were like, yo, like, get off my case. But it's so interesting that if someone else asks, it's like, oh, actually, maybe, And so I think it doesn't have to be super, there's not like a gauge of he's ready to study the Bible. Think if you just find someone that your kid looks up to. I looked up to Will Garcia, and just having Will Garcia come and ask me, do you want to study the Bible? Oh yeah. And if I said no, then I'm not ready. But I think just having another mentor, another teen friend, or someone outside source that's like, hey, you want to study the Bible, and explaining what studying the Bible is. Right. Like, hey, by the way, this isn't a commitment. Like, you're just going to learn the scriptures. It's tough. I have to say, people are most likely ready to study the Bible post teen camp or post youth corps or post seeing their friends baptized. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I think for me, I was in 8th grade and I love the middle school ministry, or actually, no, I was in 7th grade, and the middle school ministry was great, but I was really yearning for some deeper lessons. And so I'm really grateful that my mom actually allowed me to stay in service and listen to the main message being preached. And it was actually Will Garcia's lesson that really hit me hard. And I actually like whispered to my mom, like, Mom, I want to start studying the Bible. And so I think there's kind of two spectrums, like somebody asking or just your kid being ready to study the Bible. And I know I was saying something about like studying the Bible with your kids, and I guess it depends on the kid, but for me, I actually did have my mom study the Bible with me in some of my studies, especially starting out. And it was just really helpful in our relationship. And I'll share about it in the next lesson as well. But it really helped build up our friendship and relationship as we got to study the words together. And it was really cool just seeing my mom teach me about the Bible through the Bible studies in a whole new way that I've never really seen before. So I think studying the Bible with your kids can be really helpful. But again, it's also up to your kids and how open they will be, I guess. But yeah, so that's kind of what happened for me.
Kind of relating to that middle school age is a question about family devotionals. What are some of the ones that you remember that kind of had the most impact on you and maybe even helped in you wanting to maybe study more?
I think even just what I've learned in college as a communication major, you remember 90% of what you say and only 10% of what you hear. And so I think if family devotionals are always just me and Emma sitting on the floor as my dad, and it's totally fine if you've done this, but if my dad just read scriptures and kind of had a quick discussion, and it's like, okay, like you won't remember that just scientifically in long term. What you will remember is, oh man, we did a family skit to this Bible scripture in this passage, and I was Joseph, and you know. And so I can't remember a specific Devo, but I think it's those Devos that are fun and interactive, especially when you have younger kids. I mean, give your middle schooler a Nerf gun, tell them to go shoot down Goliath, you know, stuff like that. And you're just like, man, but when you do it, it sticks a lot more.
Yeah, ditto.
There you go. This is actually a really great question. I think very valid and important. It says, how much does it affect your kids when mom and dad don't show a lot of love toward each other, hugs, kisses, etc., but it's shown toward the kids? You know, how does that affect the kids? What would be your response? And I'll share what my thoughts are.
I want to see my mom and dad love each other.
Yeah.
I think if anything, we go out there in the world and your kids are going to go see at school, like boyfriend and girlfriends loving each other. And if they're showing more affection at school than my parents are, it's like, man, I just think it's those little things. It's so small, but it can lead people to like, well, I guess relationships are better in the world than in the kingdom if my parents don't even love each other like that. So, I mean, you know, PDA, like don't overdo it or anything, but it would be, you know, it's very nice seeing my parents kiss after every prayer before we eat and stuff like that. It's like, you know.
Oh, well.
Whoa.
There you go.
Also, I think it's kind of been a little joke in our family, but every time like mom and dad hug or kiss or something, my sister, when she was at home, she would always go like, the time of love. And like, I don't know, it was just like a really beautiful thing just to see like, oh wow, my parents really love each other. And it helps, I don't know, bring our whole family together, I feel like.
Now, of course, this comes back to the love languages. Not every love looks the same, but it can be communicated. I also think why this is so important. When God created the very first family in Eden, there were no children. He created a husband and a wife. I really believe family is based on the marriage. If you're going to have strong family, you have to have a strong marriage. And so I do think it's very important you take the time to work on your marriage as well. And it's okay, even if your kids see that you have challenges and struggles, be honest about it. Let them know you get input in your relationship. Yeah.
Oh, right.
They're still seeing.
Oh, here they go.
Hey guys, thank you so much for answering all the questions, your lessons, fantastic. Thank you so much for just your feedback and your help. So we are going to take just a short break here. We'll take a 10-minute break and then we'll come back for the second lesson. The second lesson will start back up and then they'll come back and join us. just for another Q&A time. So thank you guys again. Have a great break, and we'll see you in 10 minutes.
Awesome. Thanks. Welcome back. We now continue with lesson 2. When they are grown, they will still do right. Let's go back to that Proverbs 22:6 CEV translation. Teach your children right from wrong, and when they are grown, they will still do right. We now want to focus on the second half of the proverb, the part in which all we can really do is trust our children will make the right decision in the end. As your children get older, we begin to lose authority as a primary way of parenting. Now influence becomes important to parenting. And influence requires great communication and modeling by us as disciples within the home. This is where the parable of Jesus really focuses on our role of parenting at this stage of our children's development. Let's continue the parable. Luke 15, verse 12. And I'm going to just paraphrase some of this for sake of time. The younger of the sons basically came to his father and said, hey, give me my share of the estate. In other words, you're dead to me. I want my inheritance now. Not too many days later, he went off, he traveled, he squandered his wealth, a lot of foolish living, something we never want to see our children do, but some will. And there comes a point, though, that no matter how we do as parents up to that point, our children will have to make their own decisions. The younger of the sons made one that had to truly be disheartening. The parable doesn't really reveal the pain that must have caused the parents in this situation, but we can imagine. This is where prayer is sometimes the only thing we can do as parents. In 1 Peter 5:7, it says, casting all your anxieties on him because he cares for you. There are a lot of things that can cause anxiety, but truly parenting is one of them, as we are always concerned for the spiritual, physical, and emotional well-being of our children. Prayer must be a dominant part of our parenting, especially at this stage.
You know, during the middle school and high school years, our kids are going to be fighting for their identity and their independence.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what is so challenging, I know, in our roles for us as moms. Because we love controlling their schedule. We know what's best for them. We have done it since they were a little baby. And letting go of that control and feeling that independence that starts to grow is really hard for us as moms. And this is where prayer really does come in, and staying engaged, even though you may feel your kid pulling away.
You know, even after becoming a disciple, there were times in my life that got really confusing. Heartbreak, breakups, just struggle and transition. There was a lot of times where I just felt completely broken and destroyed, and I had no idea what to do. And it was at those moments that my parents, I could tell they were praying for me day in, day out, every night, and I could feel it. I could feel those prayers. And the moment that blessings started pouring into my life, I vividly remember standing there one night at an ICMC, calling my mom and saying, Mom, I don't deserve the blessings that are coming my way right now. It has to be because of your faith. There's no way that God is blessing me right now because of my individual faith. It's got to be because my parents have been praying and my grandparents have been praying. And so I wanted to share that too, because sometimes you don't need to do anything but give your child to God. I'm so grateful. There was nothing specific that my parents said in those times. It was just that they prayed for me. And when your kid knows that their parents are praying for them, man, what a difference it makes.
You know, our daughter Emma will be sharing her testimony as well, but I just wanted to share, there was a point in time when she was in middle school where all of a sudden this little girl I literally called her my sidekick. She went everywhere with me, everywhere. She was my little, she would go to my Bible studies with me, and then we would go out for ice cream afterwards, and we go feed the ducks, and she did everything with me. And then somehow in high school, I lost a connection with her, and I didn't know what happened. It was like we just started drifting. And she'll share kind of some of the things that were going on with her at that time, but part of it was I didn't have the control anymore like I thought I did. And so with her pushing away and kind of wanting me to back off, I got my feelings hurt, and I withdrew, and I literally just disconnected. I didn't know what else to do other than pray. And I can remember at times feeling hurt and saddened at the loss of our friendship and at the loss of just the beautiful
relationship that we had and nurtured and formed. And somehow the world was just getting in there and I didn't know what to do. And I remember thinking about this father and thinking about what this father must have done and all the years of training and all the years of giving and supporting and providing and nurturing. And I know it doesn't mention the mom here, but I'm sure she had a lot to do with that too. But I know when we can say all we can do is pray, we don't understand how powerful prayer is. Sometimes that's where God wants us to be. This is all I want you to do right now is just pray. And sometimes as parents, we can feel like that's not enough. I need to be doing more. And I remember during a time with Emma going through that in middle school, literally being at a retreat with some of the women and at a conference and saying, you know what, everybody I talked to, and they said, hey, how are you doing? I said, will you pray for me and my daughter? I told everybody. We would be passing by people in fellowship. Hey, how are you? Great. Can you pray for me though? I need you to pray for me and my daughter. I told everybody. And when I tell you that I believe that turning point that she will be sharing about was absolutely an answer to all of those prayers that were prayed, it's amazing.
I'm so grateful for all those things I shared about earlier and all the practices that we did as a family growing up. But there was a point in time where in middle school, I wanted to push up my parents' boundaries and kind of venture out and find my own freedoms. I wasn't always allowed to have social media, and I'm really grateful for my parents' boundaries in that way. But I'm also really grateful that my mom allowed me to have Snapchat when I turned 13 because it showed a lot about what was going on in my heart and it revealed my sinful nature. As a rebellious teenager, I wanted to use it for all it's worth and push past those boundaries and find ways to talk to random people and try to fill that void inside of me of craving attention from guys. I would go behind my parents' back and talk to strangers and random guys I've never met, and it went on for quite some time without my parents' awareness. And through that deceit, I started distancing from my parents, especially from my mom. And after school, I would just go straight to my room and ignore her and just go on Snapchat, and it placed a huge wall between us. Through that time of me drifting farther and farther away from my mom, I'm so grateful that she would continually ask me probing questions. And I just want to encourage you parents, even though I was really annoyed and would brush off all the questions my mom asked me, I did hear them and it would always stick with me. Through social media, I eventually saw the horrors of Snapchat as someone ended up sending me an inappropriate picture. And it made me realize, how did I get here? How did I get myself to this lost and lonely place? Along with that, I was also texting a random guy from school, and one day my mom actually found out and I got exposed. But what I thought was a curse at the time really turned out to be a blessing, as it was the first opportunity I realized how freeing being open was. And it was the first step in my relationship with my mom, just getting vulnerable again. With that, I'm also very grateful that my mom understood as a teen I needed people closer to my age to open up to. And she actually reached out to a campus student I knew well and trusted to just open up about my life and what I was going through. And it really helped me in my spiritual walk with God, just realizing, wow, vulnerability is beautiful. This all led to me studying the Bible and being open and convicted about my sin and growing strong convictions and making the decision to become a disciple of Jesus Christ. And I'm so grateful that God saved me, but also my relationship with my mom. And it's stronger than ever before. And I've been able to make strong convictions about deleting Snapchat completely and opening up to my mom every day and just keeping that transparent heart. And I'm just so grateful for the whole journey, and it's been a blessing.
So when we think about this father and what he did when his son went away, I am sure he prayed and prayed and prayed till his knees were red and bloody. I'm sure his journal books were filled with his tears, like a lot of mine have been. It's amazing, though, what prayer can do. It doesn't say it'll be immediate, but our prayers never die. And our prayers that we pray and that we ask others to pray, this is where we need the village to pray for each other's kids and to pray for our own hearts. It's not just about our kid, but what is it that I need to do to engage? What is it that I need to do? What questions are the right questions to ask to get to my child's heart? So important, the prayer.
Yeah, I'd really encourage you as a church to even plan out days of prayer and fasting for our children. Some of our children may be doing well, and they've made a decision to become a disciple, Others, they're still struggling. They're on the fence, and others just are completely deciding they don't want this path. But we should never stop praying. We should never give up. As the story continues, we know that this young man eventually hits rock bottom. He's now even wanting the food that the pigs were being fed. And he comes to his senses. And I think that's super important. He came to his own senses, not his father's, not ours. Our children are going to have to come to their own senses. That's why prayer sometimes is the only thing we have. But he did. And so he eventually decides, I got to go back to my father. And he thinks about and he's grateful for what he had before. But he comes, and as he's coming, it's really not what the son does at this point. It's what the father does. Even while he was a long way off, he ran to him. He saw him. In other words, for him to even see him, he must have been always looking. There was an expectation. He never gave up that one day as he looks out, he might see his son returning. We got to be that way for every one of our children and for each other's children. And of course, you know the story. There's a great celebration. So what's the first point of parenting that we get from this first part of this parable? Never give up. See, when his son wanted to leave and do life on his own, the father knew he had to let him go, but he never was going to give up. How do you deal with it when you know you need to let go so that your children can make their own mistakes? Do we allow our children to learn the lessons they can only learn when they succeed or fail based on their own decisions? These are some important questions, and they're a lot easier to ask than to answer. Now, when the son did come to his senses, he returned home. The father saw him and ran to him. He was always looking. He was consistently waiting. Now, I can only imagine, as my wife shared, how many tears were between when he left and when he returned. He waited in anticipation. We need to always anticipate the best of our children while still maybe experiencing the worst. See, his son may have been out of his reach, but he was never out of God's reach. See, do we get tired of teaching our children the same thing over and over? Do we grow weary in the wait?
Sometimes as parents, the wait involves the wilderness. Sometimes we're going to be watching our kids. And again, this comes back to we can't control it. This is not in our control. But our kids will be led to the wilderness. They will be led to be pruned and to let their convictions be known. They will be refined and they will meet God. And it's in these wilderness experiences that are sometimes the hardest things as us as moms and just as parents to watch our kids go through these trials. I remember when our oldest went off to college. She was only, 19 years old, and she went away 9 hours away. And I remember as she was trying to build relationships there, she wasn't connecting, just different people and relationship and leadership styles. And it was just harder for her to connect being that far away from home with a whole new group of people. She also was living with a Christian that we thought this was going to be a great situation for her. But shortly after she moved in with this disciple, the disciple left God. And all of a sudden, the world was brought into her apartment. Drugs, alcohol, guys staying over. Our daughter, for the first time, was seeing the world like she had never seen it before. And again, as a parent who you try so hard to put bubble wrap around them and protect them, and here she's off 9 hours away with new people, new relationships, people she's not connecting with as much, and now her roommate in her own house has left God and bringing the world into her apartment. It was a scary time as a parent, watching your child go through a really challenging time spiritually, and just her standing alone in the wilderness with God. And then in addition to all of that, she was building a relationship with a brother that did not work out. And a week and a half into dating, he broke up with her. And so all of these rejections and all of this, the hurt, all of this was taking place when in her mind, she was thinking, hey, I am a Christian, I'm doing it right. Why am I feeling all of these rejections and hurts and the world and everything's falling apart? And that's hard as a parent, again, when you've raised them up to love God and trust God, and And then you're watching them in these wilderness experiences. There were a lot of phone calls, a lot of tears, a lot of prayers, again, that we prayed. And ultimately, we did end up bringing her back, home, and she ended up getting into another college and had a very different experience. But she did survive, but it was challenging. I think one of the biggest things as parents that we choose faith over fear. I know that our kids are going to go through their trials. They're going to go through their hard times. They may step away. They may walk away. They may be led to the wilderness. But regardless, as parents and as disciples and as their greatest cheerleaders, we have to decide to have faith over fear. Again, I asked so many people to pray for that situation. I got so many people involved. Please be praying. Please be praying for her strength. We would go visit. We would call. We stayed connected. And I think God used that time to refine us as parents to trust Him, but it also refined our daughter to also realize God is in the storms. God is in the desert. Her character was refined, her convictions were deepened, and her trust was stronger, made stronger.
We can't control them as they get older. We can only control how we're going to be, faithful or fearful, prayerful or panicking. We've got to determine that we're going to at least never give up hope. And our children are going to have to learn to do the same. There's a lot that they learn from us growing up, but there are some lessons they can only learn on their own journey. Let's continue the story to look at the next point about how to be a parent to older children. In verse 25, we now deal with the older son, the one who stayed. It says the older son was in the field, and as he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he summoned one of the servants, couldn't even ask his dad, questioning what these things meant. Your brother is here, he told him, and your father has slaughtered the fattened calf, because he has him back safe and sound. We see from the story that he becomes angry and even begins to question his father. But I love what it says the father did. The father recognized that the older son was angry, and he went to him and says, so his father came out and pleaded with him because the son didn't even want to go in. But he replied to his father, look, I've been slaving many years for you, and I have never disobeyed your orders, yet you never gave me a goat so that I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, can't even say it's his brother, came and has devoured your assets, and he slaughtered the fattened calf for him, son, he said, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice. The second point we learn from the father is that he met his children where they were. We're always told we need to treat our children the same, but that's not actually true. We actually need to love them the same, but we got to treat them differently. See, he met the prodigal on the road as he was coming, but he met the oldest on the front porch. Both were in a place of need. Both were struggling with their own issues, yet the father met them where they were. Do you meet your children where they are, or do you expect them to meet you where you are? He let the prodigal go, whereas the oldest, he pleaded. See, he understood what they each needed. We are called to love our children the same, not treat them the same. We have to treat them differently because they are each unique. This parable reveals the actions of the two sons, but even more, reveals the heart and actions of the father. He could not be responsible for his son's actions at this point. He could only be responsible for his own. This was a hard lesson for me to learn, especially in my relationship with my son. I was trying to just be the same with him as I was with our older daughter, Haley, and my son's very different. He's more sensitive. He has more feelings deeper inside, and I didn't take the time to really dig into that or to listen. I would think I was so focused on trying to make him right that I wasn't right. And it really began to divide us in our relationship, something that really hurt. And my wife tried to help me a lot. And I tell you, husbands, our wives are our helpers if we'll listen. She would try to help me to see what was going on. And times I heard her, and other times I just was defensive. I was prideful. But I saw what was happening, and I didn't want this. I knew I needed to humble out, that if I'm going to meet him where he is, I've got to let go of myself. I can't expect to be where I am. Why am I expecting this teenager who doesn't have the Holy Spirit yet to change when I'm an older man with the Holy Spirit and I don't have to? So I really appreciate the village in this particular case. I'm like, man, why can't I have a good relationship with my son? I'm an evangelist. I should know how to do this. But you know what? Even I need help. And I really appreciate the other men in my life and the youth and family ministry. My son really respected some of these other men. I'm so thankful that he grew up in a ministry where he had a lot of connections with other adults. And so I decided I need to talk to these men to get some time with my son, find out what he's really feeling about his relationship with me, and come back and disciple me. And to their credit, they did. And it was not easy to hear. See, I really was not listening to my son's heart. I was inconvenienced. I was frustrated. I got angry. I just wanted him to change, but I wasn't willing to change first. And so thanks to the help with them and my wife and others, I eventually realized, okay, it's not about discipling him right now. It's about listening. It's meeting him where he is. And I tell you, it is a night and day difference with our relationship today. And eventually, as he did become a disciple, he invited me in the studies, and that was such an amazing time for us to connect and to really see each other where we were at. And that was really a lot more in common than we realized. See, I hope you understand that, hey, there's some kids we have a more natural relationship with, and others it's going to take work. You got to do your part, but you don't have to do it alone. Really appreciate the village that God gives you.
When it came to the point in my life where I needed to make the decision for myself to be a disciple of Jesus Christ, there really wasn't anything else my parents could have done to push me to that decision. And they didn't. They didn't push me to that decision at all. And if you're feeling like, oh, my kid is not a disciple because of something I as a parent have done or the lack thereof, I wouldn't agree with you there. Because for me, it was seeing my peers. It was the outside sources. God using my parents to raise me was great. But to actually jump over that edge and make the decision to follow Jesus, it took me seeing my older sister falling in love with God. It took me seeing teens preaching God's word at a conference, teens pouring their heart out in testimony and serving on youth corps. Once I saw that outside of my own home, I realized my need for Jesus. I realized how hypocritical I was, and how no matter how good of a kid I thought I was, there was no way, that I was saved when I was looking at the lives that these teenagers were leading and then looking at my own. And so there's so many outside forces that come into play in your child making the decision to become a disciple. And I have to say, it really helped that my parents didn't push me to study the Bible. It allowed me to fall in love with him naturally, fall in love with him through seeing my friends fall in love with him. And it just has such a different outcome when you fall in love with God that way.
And another area for me as a mom that I've had to work on recently is when my older daughter got married. Again, an incredible day. We were so grateful. She married David Louis, and they got married about 1.5 years ago. But it was an adjustment for me as a mom, because it's not just letting your daughter go and everything's still the same. It's you're letting her go because, as the Bible says, you leave your father and mother to be united to your husband. And I knew that. And of course you want that and you dream that for your children. But I don't think I realized the part of leaving was going to be so challenging and difficult for me emotionally. And so it was one of those things that, again, all these different stages of life, whether it's as a small child, just, having a baby and an infant, to having them go away to daycare if you're a working mom, or having them go to kindergarten for the first time and stay all day at school, to going into middle school or graduating high school, or sending them off to college, or having them get married. All of these things are an adjustment for us as moms, and it can just rip at our heartstrings of letting go. And I know one area that I've had to do is I've had to really go after my time with God, to dig down deep, to dig through some of the depression that I felt, to dig through some of the areas that I felt that needed to change. I knew, again, it wasn't my daughter that needed to change. She was going off living her life. It was me that had to adjust to the new dynamic in our relationship. And so in the same way, as our children grow, we are going to continue to grow and continue to have to meet them where they're at, not expecting them just to change, but for us to change. I think about that dad in this story. I think about how much it would have been so easy for all of us to have said, where was the lecture? Where was the I told you so? Where's the, where's the punishment to some degree for what you did to me and my name and my family? But I am sure he worked on his heart to adapt and to change and to, and again, this is the heart of God, to be able to get to that point where you throw a party and you rejoice and there's nothing expected outside of the fact that you are just rejoicing over them. So I just wanted to share that I think as we continue to grow as parents, even if we're not at these different stages that I've talked about already, as we continue to grow, we're going to have to continue to change, continue to search our hearts and find areas that we need to improve ourselves so that we can continue to be the parents that God wants us to be.
We saw in the first lesson, it's about authority, ultimately God's, through us, in us, and exemplified to our children. And then in later life, it's on them. They've got to make a decision to respond to God's authority. We no longer have authority, we have influence. But I do want to end with these quick thoughts about influence. It's not just ours. We have to know that God is influencing our children through all kinds of experiences and contexts. Our children are so blessed, particularly in the church, that they have influences from other peers, siblings, teen leaders who sacrifice their time and schedule to be big brothers and big sisters, to other parents. Your children need to have great relationships, not just with you, but with other parents in the church as well. And let's not forget the incredible influence that youth and teen camps have on our children. And I strongly encourage, no matter where your kid's at spiritually, get them to be part of a Hope Volunteer Corps or Youth Corps. We have seen transformation in so many children, even ones who had no desire to be with God. The influence of seeing other peers serving and loving God has a profound impact on them. And then even those of our children who, as far as we know, don't have anything to do with this, God's not stopping in his influence. Their own trials, their own journeys, their own experiences can also influence. I really appreciate my wife and I, we had the opportunity to be part of an elders conference. And there was this one woman who shared something very personal that she had learned over the years, and that she had changed her prayers a little bit. That no longer was she just praying for her children to become disciples. She started praying that they would die faithful. I hope these principles have helped you this weekend. I hope you have the confidence and faith that you're not alone. Single parents especially, I want you to know we're with you. We're praying for you. We want to be a support to you. But this is hard work. There's our part. There's our kids' part. But there's always God's part.
I hope the second lesson has helped answer some of those questions we had in the first session. As we deal with older kids, we lose that authority, and it comes down to influence. I have a few questions already, and please continue to post while we're talking here. I'll deal with one of the harder ones right off the start. What do you do when you have a child, a kid, a teenager, who just really wants to rebel? They're that prodigal. They want to have an impure dating relationship. They want to get into drugs and alcohol, marijuana, and those things. What do we do with that? There's no perfect answer. I'm very careful to just say, do this, because I don't know the individual that this may be pertaining to. There's a lot of background that goes behind every one of these situations. Some of it may be the family dynamic. Some of it may be things from the past. Some things maybe have nothing to do with your family, but outside influence from friends at school. And some is just Satan himself is attacking our children. So there's no perfect answer. But I do think this parable tells us we have to let go. Our children have to be sinners before they can be saved. And of course, we're praying that none of our children will sin to the point that the consequences are lifelong. Like, that's what we're praying for. But in terms of they're still living with you at home, it's tough. I do believe tough love is important. If they're going to live under your household, then they have to live according to your rules, or they need to go be their own person. Then if they want to do their own thing, then they got to go live on their own. And that's just my opinion. I'm not saying that's the best advice. I really would encourage you to find those who know you, who know your kid, and to seek their input and insight. These are really tough situations, but some of us need to remember, many of us, we weren't raised in the kingdom. We were sinners. We were out doing those things or even worse. And yet God still moved in our lives. God absolutely can move in our kids' life. Even when they're out of our reach, they're never out of God's reach.
Yeah, and I just want to add to, again, I know I expressed this earlier, but our hearts as parents go out to those parents who are dealing with these things, and whether, we're dealing with a rebellious teenager who is wanting to do drugs, alcohol, all those things, or whether we're dealing with one who is a disciple, like the older son in the story, who is just dealing with self-righteousness and attitudes and just, I don't know, more of the Pharisee type thing. We're dealing with, our kids are going to all deal with something. There's no perfect child. There's no perfect parent. And I think it's just one of these things that we just have to pray for each other and continue to seek input from those parents who have gone through those things. And again, just never lose hope that your child and that God is watching over them. I do believe that with all my heart, that whatever decisions our kids make, God is watching over them, and that God will be with them to help meet. I mean, as we know, Acts 17 talks about God puts us exactly where we are so that we will find him. And I believe that even if our children make decisions to go out into the world, that God is still there waiting to be found.
My kids have grown up and have experienced that with even some of their friends, those who never became disciples or did and then left. Is there any thoughts you guys can share just to encourage the parents?
I mean, I can't even imagine. I can't imagine what that's like and how painful that is. I'm not a parent. I'm just a guy. I'm 22 now, but I have grown up with some of my best friends, childhood friends who going from being 9 years old together and playing with Nerf guns to becoming disciples together, every single one of us, and then to going to college and it just being my roommate and I that stayed faithful, and 4 of my best friends all walked away within that first year. And a lot of it due to drugs and due to a girl or, wanting to have a relationship. And it was so heartbreaking. It's like, oh my goodness. And it's been an interesting journey trying to learn how to respond to that. And I think in the end of the day, the only reference I have, I'm not a parent, I don't know. The only reference I have is this parable of the father. And the father didn't necessarily go out and, rebuke his son out in public. He did wait at home. And the moment that he came back, he sprinted with love. And so I think for me, it's learning to continue to be that source of love. I think it's easy for when our friends walk away to like be bitter and like, well, they chose that, but it's been an incredible thing to realize that my friends that go out to the world, it's exhausting out there, and people aren't going to be fulfilled out there, and maybe 3, 4, 5, 10 years of sin, but it will take its toll. And if I'm still connected to them as a source of love and a source of light in God's word, they see that. And so I'm actually seeing some of my friends start to come back a little bit, little by little. But I wish I could offer more. It's a really painful situation, but I mean, just continue to love God and continue to love them. I know it's different when it's like they're under your own roof and stuff.
Yeah,
but that's a completely, separate subbar, but yeah.
I think this is where that whole chart about authority and influence, as we lose authority, technically our children now start to have additional authorities, whether it's a coach, whether it's a boss, whether it's a teacher, professor. But also in the same way, as influence is really our only way to parent at this point, it doesn't mean we're the only influence. We really need other people influencing our kids' lives. As my son and my daughter shared in their testimonies, other individuals, other disciples were involved, that they had other people to go to. this is really where a village is so important. I especially want to encourage the single parents, don't do this alone. Get help from others. Sometimes we get to the last straw with our own kid. We're angry, we're impatient, we're hurt. We're not even in the best place to help our kid at that point. We need champions outside of us. That's something my wife and I have always felt being in the ministry is we want to champion every kid, even the kid that no one thinks is going to be a disciple. I'm going to keep trying to reach out to them. I'm going to keep praying for them. If the parents lose their faith for the kid, I'm not going to lose the faith for their kid. And I've had people do that for me and for our children. And so just remember that there's other possible influences that can help. Now, there was a question about what about certain friends your children have that are bad influences? What do you do with that? That's a tough one. It really kind of depends on the dynamic of that situation, the context. Is that bad influence another person in the church who's maybe not a disciple? Is it someone outside in school? There's no perfect answer, but this is your family. And while they're under your household, you want to guide it. What do you want it to look like? I think that's important.
And I think in those earlier years, we did. I mean, we didn't do sleepovers at our friends' houses. I mean, unless they were a friend that we had really gotten to know and we knew their family well. We definitely would try to encourage people more to come over to our house. And there were definitely times where you would observe some things and behaviors that you're like, okay, we're not having this kid over again, or you're not going to go to their house. And, so yes, you do have to step in more. It gets more challenging though, as the years go on, because a lot of times your kid is going out, they're driving to their friend's house, they're going places, and it makes it a lot more difficult. So again, if you can do that teaching earlier on, those of you who have younger kids, do that teaching earlier on in terms of, just really making sure that you pull people in. There definitely in every one of our kids were situations, and this is even within the church, that we're like, oh, this is not the best influence. Because sometimes it's not even just so much of a worldly influence as much as it's just even character. Chemistry. It's just sometimes they just get together and they get in all kinds of trouble. And it's not even, trouble like drugs or alcohol. It's just trouble as in their chemistry just doesn't work well together. And so we had to do a lot of that navigating in those earlier years. So the earlier, the better. But yes, you definitely as parents have to step in, and that's challenging and difficult. But we did it with all three of our kids. And eventually they start seeing that. And you want your kids to be loving and not be exclusive, but there will be times for sure that you'll need to step in and help direct their relationships.
And just like this father in the parable, we're just going to have to trust God. And it is difficult. And that's where, again, those prayers become very important. He didn't go after his son. He didn't try to rescue his son. He let him come to his own senses. Sometimes when we try to intervene too quickly, we don't allow our child to come to their senses. And so we have to be careful. And we have to trust other people in our children's lives. When my daughter and Josh went off to other schools, other cities, I just had to put my trust in those leaders there and campus leaders there and their friends there. And, we have to believe God is bigger, that he can work and is working in our children's lives. Is there any thoughts that you guys have just in growing up and that you'd like to share?
Just in growing up, or what?
Yeah, just some of the things that you've learned.
With friends or what?
Yeah, with friends, those kinds of things.
I mean, there's a lot. Obviously, when you're younger, we don't have the discernment to like, this isn't the best, person to hang around. But I think obviously having the parents' involvement and just like, all right, let's steer you over here and here. As you get older, you got to make your own friends on your own, and but that training stays with you, and so you have that, that mindset to kind of, all right, let me go find the right friends. But I don't know if this is pertaining to that specific question, but man, I was seeing something out there about just teens that don't want to go to anything, and that's really hard too. I know this is kind of subbarring here or sidebarring, but I have seen, just if it's any encouragement, so many teens that grew up in church and just this past year never wanted to go to teen events. They actually did go off and do drugs and things like that, and then their freshman year of college, all their parents did was like, hey, gave a heads up to the campus leaders. just a heads up, this is her name, this is their name. They're going to be there. I don't know if they're open, but please just keep them in the loop if you can. And over the course of that semester, study the Bible, became a disciple. So I think if anything, it is just finding those champions out there, like my dad was saying. And it's totally possible in God's timing. Sorry, I don't really know
No, that's good. They're not easy questions.
Yeah, I can kind of talk about when maybe some people in the church aren't always the best example. And I know this past year, a lot of my friends have been seniors, and when we all get together, kind of like with the chemistry my mom was talking about, sometimes the conversation would not become very godly. And it was hard for me because as a sophomore at the time, I felt I had no influence over them, and I felt like I couldn't speak up because they were seniors. Like, oh, they're going to be like, why is this youngling trying to tell me what to do and talk about? But I think with all the training from my parents and growing up and trying to be an example in every friendship group, I think really helped. And with advice, my mom helped me speak up to people, and especially in the church, and trying to guide all the friendship groups and the conversations towards godliness. And so I think, I don't know if that happens to any of your kids, but just really training them to have that discernment in friendships and not being afraid to speak up, especially with that scripture in 1st or 2nd Timothy about setting the example even when you're young. So yeah, that's just something that I've seen in my life. But.
One of the questions was, how do you know when to discuss something and when not to with your older children? And that is really a question of, well, how's your communication been up to that point? If you've never really been a family that openly discusses certain topics, then that might be hard to suddenly throw that on them at this stage of their life. That's why I really encourage you from young, older, there shouldn't be any taboo topic, but you want the Spirit to guide it. Do you want to answer it with God's standard, not just my opinion? And also, sometimes you don't have to be the one to discuss it. There were some topics that I knew and I trusted that Will Garcia, our youth and family leader, that he could talk to Josh. It didn't have to just be me, that it could be Addie talking to Emma or Haley. And so we got to trust that God has surrounded us with amazing help, but we got to be willing to be open to it. We're never going to be ideal parents. The goal is not for our children to be sinless. It's for them to be faithful. But one thing I can always be is an example of repentance. And if that's something my children can learn, that, hey, no matter what I do right or wrong, I can change, then that's the greatest lesson we can give them. The last question here before the Wootons get back on is, what about sports and extracurricular activities along with trying to be devoted to God? This is a very real challenge. There's those who are just rebelling, and that's one challenge. And I do want to say that if you have multiple siblings and one's really rebelling, be careful you don't forget the other siblings. That loudest voice sometimes can take all our attention, and then the ones that aren't rebelling are not getting the attention they need. And so we have to remember to balance our love. We love them all the same, but we have to treat them differently. But it is just as big a risk as rebellion is when our children become so focused on achievement that no longer is character and commitment important to their lives. I was a full ride scholarship athlete, so I understand these challenges that it can become your God. And so as parents, while they're still under our control, under our household, we need to be careful how much we make that the priority. God and family needs to always be first in that. We always made sure that they only had one extracurricular activity that they could focus on. If it was too many, one other area of life, whether it's our family or the spirituality, could fall. But at the same time, we shouldn't be fearful, because there's many lessons that both my children learned by being in these other activities, learning to interact with other kids, learning to have other authorities like a coach. They're like, whoa, he's kind of mean, but it's like, this is reality. If we protect them too much, they're not going to survive when they do get out on their own. And so those are some tough questions. But again, we're talking generally. Every situation is unique. Every child is unique. The dynamic of your family is unique. Seek local input, those who know you and those who know your children. But we just want to thank you so much for allowing our family to be with you this weekend. And again, they have our contact information. If you want to send us an email or text with other questions, then hey, please do so. We're in this together. Our village isn't contained in our city alone. We have our brothers and sisters around the world that we can learn from, that we can imitate, and we can see God ultimately help us to start our children on the way so that when they're older, they will choose what is right.
Bye, you guys.
Guys, thank you so much. We totally appreciate you taking the time out to share with us really your lives. I completely appreciate all your vulnerability, your willingness to share the ups and the downs. It was really encouraging. So we really appreciate that. And I just want to thank everyone that took the time to even watch it. It says so much about you, that you want to be godly parents, that you want to take the time to learn, to grow, to be different, to really guide our children to see God and to know God. So I just want to say I really appreciate everyone that is watching and taking the time, and really even lift you up for that too. And I thank Baton Rouge, New Orleans for being here also. We're grateful to be able to continue to build those bridges and those relationships as a village with you all. And I also want to just thank Jason at renew.org. He's kind of on the background here, but just appreciate you guys so much in helping us be able to have these type of events and these type of interactions that we definitely couldn't have done it without you guys.
Thank you so much, Vett family. You guys really shared your hearts today. I love being able to learn from your example. It's just encouraging to be able to have families like yours, like so many in our churches, that we can look to for example. So it's an honor being able to have you here. So thank you. I wanted to just share, because I know a lot of things that the Vetts shared today, great principles, things that we can apply, from infancy to even our adult children. And with everything going on right now within our country, there's so much hurt, so much pain going on. And it's centered around injustice, and it's centered around acts of racism. And some of these topics can be very, very hard to talk about, whether you have a elementary student or you have a teenager. Like both of our kids one is 19, the other one's 17. And even in their maturity, having those kinds of conversations, honest discourse about what they may be seeing on the news, what they're hearing on social media, it's a tricky little dance. And, we need each other. That village that the Vetts talked about is so important. So we wanted to basically add as a resource for the parents, for those of you that are supporting families, whatever your role is. Tasha Archer from the Potomac Valley Church posted a video that I thought was really, really encouraging as just a first approach. It's basically called How to Talk to Your Children About Racism. And in it, she shares her own personal desire to want to try to navigate these waters with children, and then give some resources on what you can do as a parent to have these kind of godly conversations and help your kids through this time. So that'll be posted on the app. So you can go there and be able just to be encouraged by that. But please take advantage of the wonderful resources that we have from our brothers and sisters from around the world that are posting things to help us work through very, very sensitive topics and try to have a godly disciples response in the midst of everything. We love you all so much. And today was just a very, very special day to really have the lessons and the tools that we need to be great parents.
Yeah, and I think as parents, along with that, we want to be a voice that our kids hear, even about these sensitive issues. We don't want to leave it to the mainstream media. We don't want to leave it to their friends. We don't want to leave it to their social media. We want to be a voice, and a loud voice, and a part of their formation of how they're viewing and seeing it too. So we just want to provide every opportunity to do that as well as possible through this time. So again, thank you guys. Tomorrow, just a couple of reminders of things that are coming up. Tomorrow, Derik's going to be right back here preaching our Sunday lesson, our Sunday service. So it'll be great to have him back as we worship, and we'll worship at our regular time at 10 a.m. And then afterwards, we can have communion in our small group and connect there. So that'll be going on tomorrow. As also, we take up our special missions offering. I know we've been praying as a church. We've been praying about West Africa, Nigeria, the different places that we're supporting and helping. And I know that we're all really looking forward to that opportunity tomorrow to kind of give back to that. And we are praying that God will bless that in an incredible way. So we love you guys. Have a great Saturday afternoon. And again, thank you for taking the time to join us today. So we love you, and we'll see you soon.
Bye.
Bye.